Thank you for attending the Partnership for Safe Medicines presentation on counterfeit medicines and counterfeit opioids. My name is Stephanie Burgess, and I'm a consultant for the Partnership for Safe Medicines, focusing on government affairs and law enforcement engagement. So who is the Partnership for Safe Medicines, or PSM? PSM is a public health group committed to the safety of prescription drugs and protecting consumers against counterfeit, substandard, or otherwise unsafe medicines. Founded in 2003, it is comprised of over 45 nonprofits, including State Pharmacy and Pharmacist Association, industry trade groups, public health groups, and law enforcement groups, such as the National Association of Drug Diversion Investigators. PSM members are the people who handle medicines from the factory floor to patient. Furthermore, PSM does not accept any corporate members or money. The membership is comprised of the folks who have a vested interest in the safety and security of the U.S. prescription drug supply. The United States has one of the safest and most secure drug supply chains in the world. However, this does not prevent criminals from seeking opportunities to infiltrate the system and traffic in dangerous medicines to the American people. In fact, counterfeit medicines have been found in all 50 states and for every therapeutic area, including high blood pressure, lifestyle, and even cancer drugs. So why are criminals trafficking in counterfeit medicines? Because the counterfeit medicine market is lucrative, a very lucrative criminal enterprise, worth hundreds of billions of dollars in illicit proceeds annually. And these criminal enterprises do not just deal in counterfeit medicines. They also deal in a range of illicit counterfeit goods, as well as illicit drugs or narcotics. As a result, this has created the current situation we find ourselves in, the nexus between counterfeit medicines and illicit drugs. To understand why this is happening, we have to look at the history of counterfeit medicines in the United States. Counterfeit medicines have been widely available via the internet and rogue wholesalers who have been trafficking in a host of medicines. We can separate the history of counterfeit medicines into three distinct phases. The first phase involved criminals selling counterfeit medicines in packaging such as blister packs to unsuspecting consumers on fraudulent websites. A blister pack holds multiple single-use doses in sealed compartments. The best example I can give is the way many over-the-counter allergy medicines are packaged. Often, these sites would masquerade as Canadian websites, which lulled the consumer into a sense of safety and security as the sites looked legitimate and consumers felt safe purchasing from our northern border neighbor. But here is why that is problematic. According to the study by the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy, more than 96% of online pharmacies operate illegally. 96%. This number is both staggering and disturbing, especially when you consider the volume of online consumerism. Purchasing medicines from non-vetted and non-verified websites poses a substantial health risk to individuals, whereby a person could be ingesting a pill that is nothing more than a placebo, actually preventing them from receiving the care they need, to more dangerous substances such as road paint, sheetrock, antifreeze, or even arsenic. From blister packs and online individual sales, counterfeiters and criminals moved on to the second phase of counterfeit medicines, the trafficking of wholesale quantities of counterfeit medicines. By 2007, criminals started to counterfeit and transship wholesale quantities of counterfeit medicines. These counterfeits were transshipped from countries like China, India, or Turkey through more reputable countries like the UK or Canada, and then arrive in the United States. These counterfeits were then sold to medical clinics and doctors throughout the US and included counterfeit medicines such as black market birth control devices like IUDs, migraine meds, arthritis drugs, and cosmetic drugs like fake Botox. As you can see from this nationwide map, this problem was everywhere and in nearly every state. In particular, in California, the FDA has issued over 517 warning letters to clinics and doctors' offices regarding counterfeit medicines since 2013. As mentioned previously, the counterfeit medicine racket is extraordinarily profitable. Additionally, it is relatively low risk criminally, as the penalties for trafficking in counterfeit therapeutics are significantly lower than penalties for trafficking in controlled substances. Therefore, it attracts a number of foreign criminals who know the accessibility to counterfeit medicines outside the U.S., the will to transship the counterfeits into the U.S., and the difficulties of extraditing and prosecuting foreign nationals in the U.S. Moreover, counterfeit medicines attract criminals because it does not require a lot of skill to fake. In comparison to other counterfeits, counterfeit medicines can easily be made to look similar to legitimate medicines, therefore hard to distinguish by appearance alone. It just needs to look like a blue, white, or yellow pill. All that is needed is a pill press, but more on that later. Or the counterfeit just needs to look like a clear liquid, no active ingredient necessary. One great example of all of this is a case involving the counterfeiting of the cancer drug Avastin. It was trafficked by several firms, but the one I will discuss today focuses on the trafficking by two Canadian pharmacists seeking to profit off vulnerably ill individuals. Originating in Turkey, the fake Avastin was transshipped through multiple countries throughout Europe, making its way to the Canadian pharmacy front, CanadaDrugs.com, and ultimately trafficked into the US. Avastin is a clear liquid and the counterfeit was just saline solution. The counterfeit vials contain a concoction of saline and mold, not the important cancer treatment drug its label purported it to be. The mold was not intentional, but a result of unsanitary conditions these drugs are manufactured in. The scam was ultimately reported by a nurse after she infused a cancer patient with a counterfeit drug and the patient had an allergic reaction to the mold it contained. Subsequent investigations led to the counterfeit trafficking ring operating under the guise of CanadaDrugs.com. Here is where it becomes problematic. Within the US, under ideal circumstances, law enforcement would be able to apprehend and the judicial system would be able to prosecute the offenders. But the two main perpetrators in this case were Canadian pharmacists who fought extradition to the US. Ultimately, it took 4 years before the U.S. Department of Justice was able to achieve a resolution of sorts to this case. The criminals were fined $34 million and a few months of house arrest for smuggling $78 million of counterfeit medicines into the U.S. and harming who knows how many people. Unfortunately, this case highlights the significant roadblocks to bringing foreign criminals to justice who traffic in counterfeit medicines. However, recently, PSM became aware of a case where U.S. authorities have had success in combating foreign counterfeiters. The bust of Ukrainian counterfeiters calling themselves Healthy Nation. These individuals were selling counterfeit versions of Epclusa, a drug that treats hepatitis C, and Abraxane and Keytruda, drugs used to treat different types of cancer. The Ukrainian criminals remained in Ukraine and out of the reach of U.S. law enforcement due to the lack of a U.S. extradition treaty. However, through skilled and dedicated police work, law enforcement managed to convince the two main suspects to travel to the U.S. to discuss future shipments of counterfeit pharmaceuticals, where they were apprehended. The two suspects pled guilty in federal court in July 2020 and are currently awaiting sentencing from behind the bars in the U.S. This brings us to the third phase in counterfeit medicines, the rise of counterfeit opioids. The emergence of counterfeit opioids is a relatively new drug trend. PSM only began to see the first reports of counterfeit Xanax and counterfeit opioids laced with fentanyl in late 2015. One might ask, why counterfeit Xanax and why add fentanyl? The answer is quite simple: money. Fentanyl-laced pills are extremely profitable for criminals. A kilo of fentanyl sells for approximately $10,000 on the dark web. A kilo is equal to 1 million milligrams. Someone only needs about 1 milligram of fentanyl to make a single pill. So 1 million milligrams can make about 1 million doses or pills. On the streets, these pills typically sell for between $10 to $20 per pill. So a criminal or criminal enterprise is poised to make anywhere from $10 to $20 million from a $10,000 investment, which is irresistible to criminals. In September 2017, PSM released its first of its kind report, 40 states and counting, the deadly combination of imported fentanyl and counterfeit medicines, warning that counterfeit pills were spreading across the country. Over the last few years, the numbers of states that have discovered counterfeit pills laced with fentanyl has risen, and so has the number of deaths attributed to these pills. As a result, PSM has witnessed the explosion of the fentanyl-laced pill epidemic in the United States. The discovery of counterfeit pills laced with fentanyl in Hawaii in October hit a grim milestone. There have now been lab-confirmed fentanyl-laced counterfeits discovered in every state. And as you all are keenly aware, the fentanyl-laced opioid epidemic is deadly. PSM has sadly attributed deaths in 42 states to fentanyl-laced opioids. In California, PSM has confirmed that 34 individuals have died from counterfeit-laced pills. However, we believe that this number is likely much higher. Shockingly, the DEA warned the country in 2019 that sampling suggested 27% of all opioid seized nationwide were fentanyl-laced counterfeits, meaning 1 in 4 pills were deadly counterfeits. Where is the fentanyl coming from? While previous intel sourced China as the main supplier and shipper of fentanyl to the United States, the last 18 months have witnessed a shift from China to Mexico. Instead of fentanyl coming straight out of China to the US, fentanyl powder as well as chemical precursors for fentanyl production get shipped to Mexico, and the cartels finish the production in country. Late last year, the DEA's National Drug Threat Assessment Report noted that seizures of Chinese-made fentanyl were down, and the new source were the Mexican cartels, specifically the Sinaloa and the Jalisco New Generation cartels. Large quantities of both raw powder and finished pills have spiked across the southern border. Looking ahead, the DEA says Chinese efforts to restrict precursor chemicals used in making fentanyl may be contributing to the rise in India as a supplier of fentanyl and fentanyl ingredients. But fentanyl is not the only illicit drug used to make counterfeit pills, nor are opioids the only drug being counterfeited. Criminals have also seen an opportunity in counterfeiting Adderall. As we know, it is a medicine used heavily by young people, who we know do not always possess the best judgment. They often trade pills amongst themselves without regard for the dangers. Due to the limits on access to Adderall, counterfeiters began pressing fake Adderall with methamphetamine. In fact, over the past 24 months, PSM has found reports of fake Adderall made with meth in 7 states. One state, which had 2 notable cases involving fake Adderall pills, was Texas. In December 2010, a lecturer at the University of Texas was indicted for her role in a counterfeit Adderall pill ring. Just 2 months earlier, a defendant in another case received a 30-year prison sentence for selling counterfeit pills, including Adderall made with meth. The proximity of students who often abuse Adderall as a study aid is notable, along with the enormous quantity of pills seized, over 350,000. The trafficking in counterfeit pills into the U.S. continues to be a lucrative enterprise for criminals. However, they also risk being detected by federal, state, and local law enforcement. And while criminals have become creative in their attempts to disguise their illicit product, including in fake burritos, ceramic tiles, and even corsets, when the counterfeit pills are seized, they are forced out of their illicit profits. As such, the emergence of illegal pill presses has provided a profitable homegrown counterfeiting opportunity for criminals. To talk about a case involving a pill press and counterfeit pills, I would like to turn the presentation over to PSM consultant Mark Baughman.
Thank you, Stephanie. My name is Mark Baughman. I'm a law enforcement consultant for Partnership for Safe Medicines. I'm also a 35-year law enforcement veteran, having served with the Drug Enforcement Administration as a special agent and also as a supervisory special agent, and later as a division drug commander for the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office. Over my career, I did participate in drug or clandestinely drug or counterfeit pill operations. I was the case agent. I assisted other agents with cases, and I also oversaw those types of investigations. Typically, those cases were multi-jurisdictional. Many of them had a foreign nexus to them. Many of them involved pill presses and the making of clandestine drugs, which were misrepresented to the actual buyers. I'm going to talk about one case in general called Operation Top Dog Hot Dog. It was initiated in Pinellas County by the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office in 2015. The case began with undercovers and confidential informants affecting purchases from individuals of what they thought they were buying was oxycodone or Xanaxes. After those buys were made, the evidence was submitted for chemical analysis, and it was determined that each pill that was purchased was laced with fentanyl. Soon after, the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office teamed up with DEA, the U.S. Postal Service, IRS, the U.S. Marshals Service, Tarpon PD, and also Pinellas Park Police Department. A combined effort and using a top-to-bottom strategy, they were able to identify over 30 members in the organization locally. They also identified the heads or the tops of the organization. They discovered that these individuals were responsible for going on the internet and using the dark web to purchase pill presses, fentanyl, and also adulterants or binder substances to help manufacture the pills using the pill presses to do so. These pills were stamped and made to look like other dosage units similar to Xanaxes and oxycodones and were represented as that when they were sold. So prior to law enforcement getting involved, there were people that were probably buying these pills that were laced with fentanyl. Throughout the course of the investigation, they also determined that the stamps, the presses, as well as the fentanyl was being shipped in from China. They also knew that these individuals were responsible for the manufacturing of hundreds of thousands of dosage units, some of which were sent via U.S. mail to New England, specifically to Boston, where that was redistributed. The members utilized car dealerships, and also they utilized car repair shops to launder their proceeds. One individual was making so much money, he ended up buying multiple luxury vehicles, high-end BMWs, Bentleys, Aston Martins. He drew a little bit of attention in the course of buying those vehicles. This 3-year investigation culminated in the arrest of multiple individuals, some of which that were charged for state violations and others that were charged with federal violations. 2 of the individuals charged in the case eventually cooperated and provided information, which led to the conviction of the head of the organization, who was sentenced to 30 years incarceration in 2019. This case, unlike a lot of other drug investigations, was basically started or related in such a way that people were buying what they thought was oxycodone, what they thought was Xanax, and ultimately they were getting a fentanyl substance as part of the binder, which more than likely in some instances caused overdose deaths. Cases like this occur across the country. A unified effort by law enforcement is needed to combat it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. The case Mark highlighted demonstrates the dangers of pill presses and the ability for counterfeiters to mass produce deadly pills. As such, in 2019, PSM collaborated with the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy and the National Association of Drug Diversion Investigators on a report warning that illegal pill presses pose a threat to all Americans because they give counterfeiters the ability to adapt to the market. When you are done making oxycodone, you can pivot to Xanax. When you do not have access to fentanyl, you can use methamphetamine. PSM predicted that the spread of pill presses meant that we are now dealing with an innovative industry of counterfeiters that would change methods and ingredients to satisfy market demand. And we are now seeing fentanyl pills pressed into very unusual formats. In August 2020, police in Ohio discovered counterfeit Aleve, and law enforcement in Arizona seeks fake baby aspirin and metformin. All of these pills tested positive for fentanyl. PSM suspects distributors are using these formats to camouflage pills, not because there's a lot of money in fake baby aspirin. The potential for someone to die because the pill looked like something they know and trust, however, is significant. I want to now pivot to talk about some of the recent major cases of note regarding counterfeit opioids. One of the biggest cases related to counterfeit pills saw its resolution in October 2020. From at least December 2015 until he was arrested in Utah in November 2016, Aaron Shamo ran an enormous drug manufacturing ring that sold hundreds of thousands of fentanyl-laced counterfeit pills. The pills were either counterfeit oxycodone pills made with fentanyl or fake Xanax made from alloprozam, purchased abroad. Agents seized 70,000 counterfeit pills made with fentanyl, 25,000 fake Xanax, over $1 million in cash, and of course, industrial pill pressing equipment. Later, they discovered $429,000 in cash at his parents' house and a substantial cache of Bitcoin. A sentencing memo filed by prosecutors in federal court in September 2020 stated that Shamo's drug ring shipped fentanyl pills to every state in the union. Data retrieved by federal agents of Shamo's sales on Alphabay showed he sold significantly more than 458,000 fentanyl-laced oxycodone pills. While no one will ever be able to say how many lives Shamo destroyed, to quote federal prosecutors, his prolific distribution of drugs led to incalculable loss and suffering. After being found guilty at trial, Shamo was sentenced to life in federal prison on October 15, 2020. Another case centers on a recent bust resulting in taking down a substantial fake pill drug ring and resulting in a historic amount of fentanyl seized. Although not in the US, it is worth mentioning as Canada is our neighbor and the ease of moving shipments and persons between our countries. In June, Ontario Provincial Police in Canada announced a major fake pill drug bust ring and seized over 123,000 fake pills made to look like legitimate Teva oxycodone and 154 pounds of fentanyl powder. The investigation began in April, with agents making their first arrest in British Columbia on May 27th. 3 days later, law enforcement shut down the Ontario-based part of the ring. These traffickers even went as far as to duplicate the labels that would be found on real Teva oxycodone bottles. These are not individual patient bottles. PSM found this case notable because they were specifically making pharmacy-sized wholesale packaging. While Canadian drug supply within Canada is pretty strong and pharmacists are diligent, the fact that they were targeting wholesale packaging is a trend we should all pay attention to. Yet another case of note involves the unbelievable seizure of approximately 15.4 tons of fake Captagon amphetamines in July. Italian police in the port of Salerno found 84 million pills worth over $1 billion inside 3 shipping containers. There are conflicting reports, but these pills are believed to be produced by ISIS or by the Assad regime itself. This seizure is said to be the largest drug bust in the world in terms of both value and quantity. According to U.S. and foreign law enforcement, ISIS has been producing large quantities of synthetic drugs to sell on the global market, as it is easy for them to do and raises substantial amounts for funding for terrorist activities. Finally, U.S. CBP continues to see record numbers of seizures regarding methamphetamine and fentanyl pills in 2020. For example, in October, CBP seized 800 pounds of meth and 9 pounds of fentanyl worth nearly $2 million at the port of Nogales in Arizona. At the same port of entry in June, CBP officers seized nearly 300,000 fentanyl pills, along with heroin and cocaine worth more than $1 million. In October 2020, CBP recorded the second largest meth bust in the history of the agency along the southwest border near San Diego, California, with a seizure of more than 3,100 pounds of meth. This bust also includes seizures from 29 pounds of fentanyl, 37 pounds of fentanyl pills, and 64 pounds of heroin. The shipment was worth approximately $7.2 million. The drugs were hidden amongst the truck's other shipments, primarily medical supplies, and were attempted to be trafficked from Mexico into the U.S. Where these deadly drugs were going once they entered into the United States is unknown, but what is clear is the harm that they would inflict on the American public without the swift interdiction from the nation's law enforcement. Synthetic-related opioid deaths continue to climb and increase to over 31,000 in 2018, compared to over 28,000 in 2017. PSM is acutely aware of the harm that counterfeit opioids laced with fentanyl, as well as counterfeit pills, cause. We work with families who have lost a loved one to counterfeit-laced pills, and would like to educate others on the dangers in an effort to prevent further deaths. There is a misunderstanding that someone who overdoses or dies from a counterfeit opioid death is an addict. However, this is not true. Many of the families whom PSM works with has lost a loved one who was not battling an addiction. Rather, they got a pill from a friend or a trusted source. They had no idea the pill was counterfeit. Additionally, that single pill is usually not the only counterfeit pill. It is probably safe to assume that the supplier is likely to have more counterfeit pills laced with fentanyl or other substances in their possession, or know where to get more pills. As such, we would respectfully recommend, when coming upon an overdose scene, that law enforcement treat the scene as a crime scene until proven otherwise, secure evidence, and test any pills that are near the victim. I would now like to turn the presentation over to Carrie Luther. Carrie is an advisory board member to PSM. She is also one of our family advocates. Unfortunately, Carrie also has firsthand experience with the devastation from counterfeit opioids. She tragically lost her son to a counterfeit Xanax laced with fentanyl and would like to share his story.
Hello, my name is Carrie Luther, and I live on the Central Coast of California. I'm a senior human resources professional, and I'm also an advocate for families of victims of counterfeit medications. I wish I could say that I'm happy to be here today, but that wouldn't be accurate because the only reason I'm here is because my son died. I am, however, very thankful to be here because I have an important message that you need to hear. Before I tell you more about how my son died, I do want you to know just a little bit about him in life. I wish I had time to tell you the many stories about him growing up and becoming a young adult, but that just isn't possible today. I do want you to know that he was a gentle and kind spirit. Well, most of the time anyway. In many ways, he was like you. So many ways. He loved music and he loved sports. And he was an excellent writer and he was goofy and funny. One time he even said that he wished everybody thought he was as funny as he thinks he is. Tosh was 29 years old when he died, and he left behind his parents and his two sisters and his little brother and two nieces, and of course, extended family and friends. About 6 weeks before he died, Tosh had acquired a terrible case of hives, and it caused him a great deal of discomfort and itching. So he went to the doctor to find out what was causing them. And of course, they told him it was some sort of an allergy and that he would need a blood test to find out what it was. And they told him just to take some Benadryl to ease the symptoms, which he did. On the evening of October 26th, Tosh went home after an afternoon at the beach and hanging out with some friends watching Monday Night Football. And he called his girlfriend like he always did. And they said goodnight. And then about an hour later, he called her again because he wasn't able to sleep because of the itching. And she said that everything sounded normal except for the itching. And so they talked for about another hour, and they agreed that he would call her by 11 o'clock the next morning because they were going to go together to get his blood work done. Well, she hadn't heard from him by 11 a.m. or by 11:30 a.m., and so she waited until about 1 o'clock to call him. And she couldn't get a hold of him, and she kept trying. And at first she thought that he was just standing her up and ghosting her, but she knew that wasn't Tosh. And so she drove to his home. And when she arrived and entered his bedroom, it was about 1:45 in the afternoon, and he was unresponsive. So she, of course, called 911 and started CPR and continued until the paramedics arrived. And he lived way up in the hills, so it took them about 25 minutes to get there. They did everything they could. We have family friends in that line of work, and they told us they did everything they could to save or to revive Tosh, and it just wasn't possible, and they pronounced him dead. Well, when Tosh's dad and I arrived at the house, of course, a deputy was there, and she prohibited us from going into his room to see him until the coroner could conduct his investigation. And so when he arrived, he did that. He went into Tosh's room and looked around and took what he thought he needed, and he actually did find a little bottle of Motrin, and it contained the remaining 3/4 of a Xanax tablet. So Tosh had taken 1/4 of the Xanax tablet, and that was all he found. And we both believe that he took that 1/4 of a tablet to help him sleep because of his itching immediately after he hung up from talking to his girlfriend that night. And that was about 12 hours later that she found him. It looked like Xanax, but it wasn't Xanax. And the lab tests conducted by the FDA confirmed that, in fact, it was made from fentanyl. And as you already know, fentanyl is 50 to 100 times more powerful than morphine and is being mixed with other ingredients and pill pressed to look like the real thing. And they're making fentanyl, they're making Xanax, they're making Percocet, they're making oxycodone and adding it to illicit drugs because it's cheap and they can make a ton of money out on the street. The toxicology report that we received only 9 days after Tosh's death, it was expedited by the local sheriff's department because they feared exactly what came to be, is that it was a counterfeit medication. And he had 13 nanograms of fentanyl in his system from 1/4 of a tablet. You need to know that Tosh didn't plan to die that night. He was not a hardcore drug user. He was a good man who had planned to be married someday and have children and give me grandchildren. And even if he had been, he should not have died from taking a Xanax. But he wasn't. He just wanted to sleep. He had no idea that what he was taking to help him sleep was not what he thought it was. The man he got it from was a known and trusted acquaintance. And our local sheriff's deputies arrested that man 10 days after his death, and he was charged with and convicted of selling illicit drugs only and weapons possession. And he ended up serving 1 year in jail because they believed him when he said that he didn't know that what he gave Tosh wasn't what they thought it was. Now, I have learned since then that that's not the case. That saddens me deeply, of course. Let me repeat that, though. He served 1 year in jail for my son's death. My son did not overdose from using drugs. My son was poisoned. And I'm sorry to say that that is not an uncommon occurrence. Since 2017, which is when I started getting more involved in advocacy, I have met far too many people whom have lost their loved ones due to a counterfeit medication under similar circumstances. They hurt their back working out and their friend gave them an oxycodone. They're studying for finals and they need to go to sleep the next morning and their friend gives them a Xanax. And it's not what they think it is. And that should not be happening, but it continues to happen. Even at Tosh's service after his, at the reception after his service, one of my closest friends' spouse came up to me and held out her hand and said, "How are you doing, Carrie? Do you need anything?" And in her hand was several different pills, one of them being a Xanax. It's that easy. And it happens all the time. I knew the moment the coroner told me how Tosh died that I needed to educate people about these dangers. I could not let Tosh's death be in vain and let more people die. Partnership for Safe Medicines found me in their research very early on in this epidemic, and they contacted me in June of 2017 and came and interviewed me. And it's through their partnership I've traveled across the country to many locations to speak to legislators about the widespread epidemic of counterfeit medications that are killing people. I've shared and will continue to share just as soon as I can once this COVID tragedy eases restrictions. But I'll continue to share Tosh's story with hundreds of high school and middle school students, warning them of these dangers. I talk to as many parents as I can. I talk to just people in the stores that I go to about Tosh's story so that they can tell their family and friends about these dangers. We were part of an ABC 2020 episode that aired in September of 2018 about counterfeit prescription medications. It's called What Really Killed Prince. This is not limited to people just in the industry of entertainment or people like you and me. It happens to anyone, and it continues to happen. NPR did a radio segment telling Tosh's story that year. The Wall Street Journal published an article about counterfeit Xanax highlighting Tosh's story that year. But there's so much more work to do to raise awareness. This isn't stopping, even after 5 years. I'm so grateful for the work you do around the country, the risks you take with your lives to stop these criminals, these murderers. They are poisoning people. And the thing that I know is that a lot of people that you find who have died of an overdose, they didn't die because they took too much of what they meant to take. They're dying from counterfeit medications. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. I'm so grateful for the partnership that I have with Partnership for Safe Medicines and other family advocates that I've gotten to know who've become my friends over the years to educate people around the country about these dangers. I am grateful that this work will be my son's legacy. I have to admit, I still am devastated that I have to live the next 20 or 25 years without my precious son. Thanks for hearing me today.
Thank you so very much for sharing Tosh's story, Carrie. Tosh's story is heartbreaking, but it demonstrates the understanding and knowledge from law enforcement on the counterfeit pill epidemic, recognizing the evidence and working to ensure the criminals selling the counterfeit pills were apprehended. As the United States continued and continues to battle the opioid and counterfeit opioid epidemic, a new threat emerged in early 2020 to add another complex layer to the issue of counterfeits, the COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has dramatically and fundamentally changed the landscape of counterfeit medicines. As we have previously discussed, counterfeit medicines are not a new phenomenon. However, COVID-19 pandemic has shown a harsh spotlight on the proliferation of counterfeit medicines and the medical supplies available both globally and in the US, as well as the creativity of criminals. Shortages of supply and the world's dependence on online marketplaces have created the perfect new opportunity for criminals. Via the anonymity of the internet, criminals are utilizing the fear, panic, and uncertainty of the American public to prey upon unsuspecting consumers and peddle in a host of fake COVID-19 protective equipment, treatments, cures, and vaccines. For example, as of June 2020, CBP has seized over 1 million fake COVID-19 products, which included fake and substandard PPEs like masks, counterfeit test kits, black market medicine, and fake treatments like colloidal silver or bleach. In Ohio, CBP seized a shipment from China which contained counterfeit drugs used in the treatment of COVID-19 and fake COVID-19 test kits, along with a multitude of synthetic drugs, controlled substances, and counterfeit goods. In Louisville, Kentucky, scammers set up a fake drive-through COVID-19 testing site. They were not sponsored by any health authority, nor did they have any laboratory processing their tests. When confronted by the media and the city councilman, they packed up and ran. However, they were collecting money and swabbing people. It is not known how much money they conned from people before being confronted. Even before there were any legitimate gains on a COVID-19 vaccine, criminals were selling fake COVID vaccines online. There have been 2 instances thus far of criminals selling fake vaccines online, and likely more that have not yet come to the attention of law enforcement. The FDA has warned consumers of hand sanitizers containing methanol, often used to create fuel and antifreeze, which can be toxic when absorbed in the skin and deadly if ingested. Concerningly, poison control centers all over the country are reporting people drinking hand sanitizer in the hopes of warding off and/or curing COVID-19. The FDA has also caught a number of vendors packaging their hand sanitizers in ways that closely resemble food packaging, especially children's food packaging, which adds to the dangers of poisonings. And finally, in California, the DOJ has indicted a California physician who predominantly provided beauty-related services such as Botox and hair removal, who was allegedly selling COVID-19 treatment packs priced at nearly $4,000, which falsely claimed to be a miracle cure and to 100% cure COVID-19. These are just a blip on the COVID-19 frauds and scams radar. This chart from Krebs on Security shows the number of domain names being registered from mid-January 2020 to the beginning of April. The blue and red lines represent how many websites each day were being registered with either coronavirus or COVID in their names. The blue line represents websites with low risk score of being scams, while the red line is for websites that most likely are scams. Legitimate organizations were always a few weeks and thousands of daily registered domains behind the scammers. In their testimony to the Senate Commerce Committee in late July, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration stated they have reviewed thousands of websites, social media posts, and online marketplace listings. As of July 1st, they had identified more than 780 fraudulent or unproven products related to COVID-19 for sale. And these are just the frauds and scams that investigators have been able to identify. For every uncovered case, there are a multitude that remain hidden within the vast expanse of the internet. The general public are not the only ones susceptible to the various COVID-19 frauds and scams. State governments have also fallen victim. The early days of the pandemic became the Wild West for the procurement of life-saving PPEs, which enabled criminals to seize the opportunity to make money. In the desperate attempts to equip first responders with necessary PPEs, states trusted who they believed to be reliable vendors to procure critical face masks. However, states such as West Virginia, Illinois, and Missouri were scammed out of millions of dollars trying to procure face masks from China, which the Center for Disease Control ultimately recalled for being unsafe. It is imperative to understand that these products are not only fake, but highly dangerous. Using fake testing kits or cures, victims could delay necessary medical treatment or lose their lives under the misguided assumption the products they bought were legitimate and they would get better. Fake PPEs give the false assumption that the user will be protected from the coronavirus while placed in precarious situations. In response, task forces have sprung up nationwide to combat the COVID-19 counterfeits. Agencies such as CBP, Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, the FBI, and the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations, FDA OIC, have created task forces specifically to target and intercept COVID-19 frauds and scams. The Department of Justice has actively been going after and prosecuting criminals who perpetrate COVID-19 frauds and scams. Additionally, state and local law enforcement have also engaged in public awareness campaigns to educate their communities on the wide array of COVID-19 frauds and scams. Law enforcement is already anticipating the market being flooded with fake COVID-19 vaccines once a reputable vaccine is announced. Both HSI and FDA OIC have announced that they are currently working with pharmaceutical companies in anticipation of a vaccine to help combat any counterfeit vaccines. One final issue I would like to discuss is an unintended consequence of COVID-19, the increase of opioid overdoses and deaths. While data is still coming out, anecdotal evidence suggests that COVID-19 has caused a significant increase in opioid overdoses nationwide. According to the American Medical Association, more than 40 states have reported increases in opioid-related deaths in 2020. A number of factors are being attributed to the rise, including the isolation and stress created by COVID-19 and the difficulties for people to find treatment for opioid addiction during the pandemic. Moreover, due to shelter in place, people are now using opioids alone, which reduces the chances of someone being able to revive the person with Narcan if they overdose. And people may be seeking out opioids on the streets, which, as we have previously noted, have a strong likelihood of being counterfeit pills laced with fentanyl. Clearly, and unfortunately, the issue of counterfeit medicines and counterfeit opioids will be on the forefront for many months to come, given the COVID-19 pandemic, the subsequent vaccine, and the continuation of the counterfeit opioid market. On behalf of the Partnership for Safe Medicines, thank you for your willingness to attend today's presentation. I will now open up the discussion for any questions.